On April 9, 1945, at 9 o'clock in the evening, silence fell under the arches of a deep bunker located in the heart of the burning city. But it was not the peaceful silence that descends upon the earth after sunset. It was a vacuum-like, ringing pause that occurs when a gigantic mechanism, working at its limit for centuries, suddenly stops forever. General Otto Lasch, the commandant of the fortress, slowly took off his glasses and rubbed his tired eyes. From above, through meters of concrete and earth, the roar of artillery, which had turned reality into a continuous earthquake for the past 4 days, was no longer heard. At that moment, he realized something more terrible than defeat in battle. He understood that he had become the last witness to the existence of an entire civilization. The City of Kings, the philosophical capital of Europe, the impregnable bastion of the East, ceased to exist not merely as a military object, but as a historical entity. The signature on the act of surrender, which he was about to affix, was not just an acknowledgement of a military fiasco. It was the final flourish in the 7-century history of Prussian militarism. At that moment, he did not yet know that for this decision, his own command would sentence him to the death penalty, and his family would be arrested. He knew only one thing: the history written with a sword ended under the treads of tanks. To understand the full depth of this drama, we need to rewind time, not just a few days, but to delve into the very essence of the place where these events unfolded. Königsberg was never just a city. It was a symbol forged from stone and ideology. Founded by the Teutonic Order in the mid-13th century, it served for centuries as an outpost of the German spirit in the East. It was here, in the castle church, that Prussian monarchs were crowned. It was here that Immanuel Kant, strolling through the cobblestone streets, formulated the laws of pure reason that were supposed to lead humanity to eternal peace. The irony of fate was that the city of pure reason turned into the most fortified citadel of 20th century madness. By early 1945, Königsberg was not just a point on the map, but a complex engineering organism. Hitler declared it an absolutely impregnable bastion of the German spirit. And on paper, it looked exactly like that. The defense system that Soviet troops were to breach had been built for centuries and modernized for decades. It was not one line, but 3 gigantic rings, each of which could have become an insurmountable obstacle for any other army in the world. The first ring passed a few kilometers from the city and included 15 main forts. Each such structure was not just a bunker, but an underground city, going several floors deep, surrounded by water moats, minefields, and electrified barbed wire. The fort walls were capable of withstanding a direct hit from heavy aerial bombs. The second defense ring encircled the outskirts of the city itself. Here, every stone building was turned into a pillbox. Windows were bricked up, leaving only narrow embrasures for machine guns and Faustpatronen. Tram cars, overturned and filled with stones, blocked the streets, creating a labyrinth in which the attackers were supposed to lose their orientation and lives. And finally, the third ring, the citadel in the city center, whose ancient bastions were reinforced with modern concrete. By January 1945, East Prussia was cut off from the rest of Germany. Soviet troops reached the Baltic Sea, and the Kessel snapped shut. Inside this Kessel were not only 130,000 garrison servicemen, but also hundreds of thousands of civilians, refugees who flocked to the city in hopes of evacuation by sea. Propaganda assured them that Königsberg would never fall. Gauleiter Erich Koch, a man whose name became synonymous with cruelty and lies, publicly swore that the Baltic Sea would dry up before the Russians entered the city. But while he delivered fiery speeches, ships were already being prepared in the port of Pillau to evacuate looted valuables and the party elite. Ordinary people, however, were forbidden to leave the city under penalty of execution for panic-mongering. The city turned into a mousetrap, where patriotic slogans coexisted with the cold horror of the inevitable end. The Soviet command perfectly understood what they were dealing with. Marshal Vasilevsky, who took command of the front, knew that a frontal assault on such a fortress could cost hundreds of thousands of lives. The experience of previous wars indicated that sieges of such fortifications could last for years. But the Soviet Union did not have those years. The war had to end in Berlin, and leaving such a powerful enemy group in their rear was strategically unacceptable. It was decided not just to surround the city, but to strike it with such overwhelming force that the history of wars had never known. The assault plan was developed with mathematical precision. The city was divided into sectors. Each house, each street was numbered and assigned to specific assault groups. But Vasilevsky's main argument was artillery. Never before had such a density of fire been concentrated on such a narrow sector of the front. Thousands of guns, mortars, and Katyusha multiple rocket launchers faced the city, awaiting command. With the beginning of April, the fog over the Baltic began to dissipate, opening the sky for aviation. This was a signal. The external conflict, visible on the maps of the general staffs, entered its decisive phase. On April 6, 1945, at exactly 9 in the morning, the earth trembled. The artillery preparation began, which lasted several hours. Eyewitnesses recalled that it seemed as if the sky itself had fallen to the earth. The sound merged into one continuous vibrating hum, from which eardrums burst and tartar crumbled. This was not indiscriminate shelling, it was surgical work with enormous calibers. Heavy howitzers methodically opened the concrete domes of the forts like tin cans. However, behind this wall of fire and steel lay a second layer of conflict, human, internal, full of tragedy and despair. General Otto Lasch, sitting in his bunker, found himself caught between a hammer and an anvil. As a military professional, he understood that the situation was hopeless. He was running out of ammunition, food, and the hospitals were overflowing with wounded, for whom there weren't even enough bandages. But hysterical telegrams arrived from Berlin demanding resistance to the last soldier. Hitler demanded that Königsberg be turned into a second Stalingrad, but for the Germans. Lasch saw his soldiers, many of whom were boys from the Hitler Youth or old men from the Volkssturm, dying senselessly and horribly. He saw civilians hiding in damp cellars where the water rose higher and higher due to the destroyed sewage system. The air in these shelters was heavy, stale, filled with moans and the crying of children. The tension of the internal conflict was exacerbated by the figure of Gauleiter Koch. This man, embodying the Nazi Party, waged his own war, a war for his own salvation. Demanding fanatic resistance from the population, he prepared his personal icebreaker for escape. Koch interfered with Lasch's military orders, accusing officers of cowardice, threatening tribunals. It was a clash of professionalism and fanaticism, responsibility and selfishness. Lasch understood that every hour of resistance only increased the number of casualties among those he could not protect. But his oath and fear of reprisals against his family bound his will. At the same time, Soviet soldiers advancing to the assault also experienced their internal conflict. For many of them, East Prussia was the beast's lair. They had traveled thousands of kilometers of scorched earth, seen destroyed Soviet cities. Now, they had entered enemy territory. The thirst for revenge fought within them with discipline and the understanding that the war would soon end. No one wanted to die a month before victory, but duty drove them forward into this fiery hell. But there was also a third layer, ideological, philosophical. The Königsberg assault became a clash of two eras, two worldviews. On one side, ancient Teutonic mysticism, a belief in chosenness, in the magical protective power of walls built by ancestors. German propaganda tried to awaken the spirit of chivalry, calling on soldiers to fight like medieval warriors. On the other side, the force of a new era was approaching, industrial, technological, devoid of sentimentality. The Soviet army in this battle represented the triumph of matter and organization over myth. Assault groups, armed with flamethrowers and explosives, did not engage in chivalrous duels. They acted methodically, burning out resistance meter by meter. It was the collapse of the idea that spirit could overcome superior matter if that matter was controlled by an iron will and reason. Kant's philosophy of the moral law within us was trampled by the reality of total war, which Germany itself had unleashed. The turning point came on the third day of the assault, April 8th. The weather improved and Soviet aviation took to the sky. It was a breathtaking sight even for seasoned veterans. The sky darkened with the number of planes. Bombers, wave after wave, attacked targets, dropping tons of explosives on the city center. The German defense, which until that moment had maintained an appearance of integrity, began to break down into isolated pockets. Communication between units was lost. Fortress commanders, receiving no orders, acted at their own discretion. Some surrendered, seeing the futility of the fight. Others blew themselves up along with their bunkers. It was at this moment that a fundamental transformation occurred in the minds of the defenders. The myth of impregnability collapsed. It became clear that no wonder weapon promised by Berlin would come to their aid. The promised relief from outside turned out to be a lie. Wehrmacht soldiers, sitting in the ruins of the royal castle, realized that they had been abandoned. The psychological breakdown was more terrible than physical annihilation. Volkssturm groups began to scatter, tearing off their armbands, trying to blend in with the civilian population. Fear of the Russians was replaced by apathy and a desire for this nightmare to simply end at any cost. Gauleiter Koch, realizing that the game was lost, left the city, cowardly fleeing on an icebreaker, leaving the garrison and population to their fate. This escape became the final verdict on an ideology that demanded self-sacrifice from others, but not from its leaders. The climax came on April 9th. Soviet assault groups broke through to the city center. The fighting was no longer for blocks, but for floors and stairwells. Flamethrowers burned out basements. Grenades flew into breaches in the walls. The university, where Kant once taught, turned into smoking ruins. The cathedral, the heart of the city, stood as a charred skeleton. Soviet parliamentarians presented Lasch with a final ultimatum. The terms were harsh, but fair. A guarantee of life and humane treatment for all who surrendered. Refusal meant the complete annihilation of the garrison. In Lasch's bunker, the atmosphere was at a breaking point. Fanatical SS officers demanded continued resistance, threatening to shoot the general for treason. But Lasch, looking at the map where red arrows had already converged in the city center, made a decision. He understood that his name would be cursed by Hitler, but he chose life for the remaining soldiers and civilians. At 9 in the evening, the order to capitulate was given. The firing began to subside. First, the heavy guns fell silent. Then the machine guns stopped rattling. And finally, the isolated shots ceased. From basements, from manholes, from ruins, people began to emerge. It was a procession of shadows. Dirty, emaciated, with wild eyes, German soldiers threw their weapons into huge piles. Columns of prisoners stretched for kilometers. The city had fallen. However, the echo of this battle resonates much longer than the cannonade itself lasted. The lessons of Königsberg extend far beyond military strategy. This is a story about the price of arrogance, a civilization that places itself above others, that builds its greatness on oppression and aggression, ultimately finds itself buried under the rubble of its own walls. Königsberg showed that there are no walls that can protect against the retribution of history. The physical disappearance of the old city and the appearance of Kaliningrad in its place is a unique historical experiment. A complete change of population, culture, language, and architecture in one territory. Today, walking through modern Kaliningrad, one can only find fragments of that former world. Kant's grave miraculously survived, becoming a symbol that true values, reason and philosophy, outlive any wars and regimes, while militaristic ambitions turn to dust. The restored cathedral stands as a monument to reconciliation, but also as a reminder. The lesson for the modern world is simple and terrible. Culture, art, science are no guarantee against barbarism if society becomes infected with the idea of superiority. A high level of development did not save Prussia from moral degradation and subsequent physical disappearance. Concluding this narrative, our mind's eye returns once more to that bunker on April 9th. General Lasch emerges to the surface. For the first time in a long while, he breathes fresh air mingled with the stench of burning. Around him is a lunar landscape. The city he was meant to defend is no more. There are only mountains of broken bricks and the skeletons of buildings blackening against the sunset. He walks to surrender to the victors, and at this moment, a period is placed on the history of the German East. The storming of Königsberg lasted only 4 days, but these 4 days obliterated 700 years of history. And when today we look at the map of Europe, we must remember, borders that seem immutable to us and cities that seem eternal can vanish in an instant if humanity forgets the lessons of the past. The silence that followed the battle should resonate in our ears louder than any cannonade, reminding us of the fragility of peace and the terrible price that must be paid for the mistakes of leaders and the silence of nations. Recalling the events of those April days, one cannot help but notice the details that make this picture volumetric and vivid. Imagine a Soviet sapper, a 20-year-old guy from near Ryazan, crawling along the cobblestones of a foreign city. Around him is Gothic architecture, which he had only seen in pictures in captured magazines. Sharp spires, gargoyles, narrow streets, all of it seems to him like a backdrop for a terrifying fairy tale. He drags a box of explosives to blow up the wall of a house from which a German machine gunner is firing. For this guy, there is no high geopolitics. There is only the task of surviving and carrying out orders. He does not know that many years later, historians will call this assault a model of military art. Right now, he just wants to avoid being found by a bullet in this stone trap. And on the other side, a German teenager from the Volkssturm handed a Panzerfaust and told that he must stop a tank. He is terrified. He wants to go home to his mother. But the fear of the field gendarmerie is stronger than the fear of the tank. He sees his world crumbling before his very eyes. The familiar bakery on the corner has turned into a pile of bricks. The school where he studied is burning. A collapse occurs in his consciousness. Everything he was taught in school about the greatness of the Reich crumbles at the sight of the relentlessly advancing Soviet T-34 tanks. These personal tragedies, multiplied by hundreds of thousands, create the fabric of a historical event, dense and saturated with pain. It is interesting to trace how the tactics of both sides changed during the battle. If in the first hours the Germans tried to maintain a continuous line of defense, very soon this became impossible. Soviet assault groups, using the tactic of infiltration, bypassed resistance nodes, cutting them off from the rear. They moved not along the streets, which were under fire, but through walls. Sappers blew passages in the walls of houses, and infantry moved inside buildings, going from one apartment to another, from one entrance to another. This was a three-dimensional war. Battles took place in basements, on floors, in attics, and even on roofs. The Germans, accustomed to positional warfare, were unprepared for such dynamism. Their forts, designed to defend against an external threat, proved useless when the enemy was in their rear or directly on the roof of a concrete casemate, pouring flammable mixtures down ventilation shafts. The history of Fort No. 5, named after King Friedrich Wilhelm III, deserves special attention. This fort became a symbol of senseless heroism and inevitable collapse. The fort's garrison resisted desperately. Soviet troops brought up heavy artillery. From direct fire, concrete-piercing shells began to smash meter-thick walls. But even after the upper structures were reduced to dust, the garrison continued to fire from underground casemates. Only when sappers crossed the moat and placed powerful explosive charges directly against the walls was the resistance broken. The fall of Fort 5 became a signal for the entire defense system. Nothing would stand. But not only steel and explosives decided the outcome of the battle. Information warfare played a huge role. Soviet planes scattered millions of leaflets over the city. These contained a pass to captivity and a promise of life. For German soldiers, exhausted by hunger and sleeplessness, these pieces of paper became their only chance for the future. The Wehrmacht command severely punished for possessing such leaflets, but soldiers hid them in their boots, in the linings of their greatcoats. It was their ticket out of hell. The psychological pressure was enormous. Through powerful loudspeakers installed on the front lines, Soviet agitators addressed the Germans, naming captive officers who had already ceased resistance, calling on them to follow their example. The voice from the loudspeakers, amplified by the echo of the ruins, sounded like the voice of fate. One cannot forget the fate of cultural treasures. The famous Amber Room, removed by the Nazis from Tsarskoye Selo, was located in Königsberg Castle. Its fate remains one of the main mysteries of the 20th century. During the storming, the castle was subjected to brutal bombardments and fires. Whether it burned in the fire, was removed in the last hours, or still lies somewhere in the buried dungeons, is unknown. This adds a mystical touch to the entire history of the assault. The city, like a greedy dragon, swallowed treasures and carried them into oblivion. The loss of cultural heritage during this operation was colossal. Libraries, museums, archives, all turned to ashes. War spares not only people, but also the memory of humanity. The events of those days also showed amazing examples of humanity against the backdrop of bestial cruelty. In the chaos of street fighting, there were moments when soldiers of warring armies found themselves in the same trap. For example, in a burning building, and for a moment ceased fire to get out, saving each other, only to become enemies again a minute later. Or Soviet doctors who, immediately after the surrender, set up field kitchens and fed the German population, which had been starving for months. Women and children came out of the basements, expecting the massacre that the Nazis had warned them about, but received porridge and bread. This cognitive dissonance, the enemy who feeds, broke the Nazi ideology in people's minds faster than any political lectures. This was the beginning of a difficult, agonizing, but necessary process of returning to peaceful life, to the realization that a person remains human even on the brink of an abyss. The Königsberg operation also became a triumph of the Soviet intelligence school. Before the assault, scouts managed to obtain accurate plans of all fortifications, schemes of minefields and fire systems. Tongues were captured, officers of engineering troops who gave invaluable testimony. Thanks to this, the command knew the weak points of each fort. Special models of fortifications were created on which assault groups trained before the battle. Nothing was left to chance. Improvisation was allowed only in details, but the overall plan was calculated like a chess game. This shows how much the Red Army grew in 4 years of war. From the retreats of 41 to the masterful breaking of the strongest fortress in Europe in 45, this is a path of colossal evolution of military thought and skill. Also interesting is the fact of how the perception of time changed in those days. For the participants of the events, time compressed. Day and night merged. The glow of fires illuminated the city so that one could read a newspaper at midnight. Sleep in snatches, food on the go, constant tension. All this put people into a state of trance. Survivors recalled that those 4 days seemed like a whole lifetime to them, and when silence fell, it deafened them. People lost consciousness not from wounds, but from a sudden release of tension. The body, working on adrenaline, failed at the moment of safety. After the capitulation, another story began. The story of filtration camps, city restoration, resettlement. But that is a plot for another tale. The history of the assault ends precisely at the moment when the red flag was hoisted over the Dona Tower. This moment is captured in newsreel footage, soldiers throwing their caps in the air, sooty faces, beaming smiles. But off-screen remained the price paid for that flag. Thousands dead on both sides, shattered destinies, a city wiped off the face of the earth. We must remember Königsberg not as a heroic myth, but as a harsh warning. Technological progress, engineering genius, cultural wealth, nothing matters if it is put at the service of misanthropic ideology. The walls of Königsberg fell because they defended evil, and no thickness of concrete could change this moral fact. This is a lesson for all future generations. Strength is not in walls. Strength is in truth. And no matter how pompous it may sound, history proves this thesis time and again, leaving in place of great empires only ruins overgrown with grass, and a silence in which an attentive traveler can hear the echo of long-gone battles. Let's look at this story once again, but now through the prism of geopolitical transformation. The fall of Königsberg meant the final resolution of the _0_, which had troubled Europe for centuries. Prussia, as a garrison state, as a source of aggression, ceased to exist. The Potsdam Conference's decision to transfer the city to the Soviet Union was dictated by the desire to forever extract the sting of German militarism. The city was named Kaliningrad. A new era began. Streets were renamed, ruins were dismantled for bricks to rebuild other cities, and the House of Soviets was built on the site of the castle, a building that was never fully occupied, becoming another symbol, now of the Soviet era. As if the very earth resisted any power, reminding of its complex fate. But memory, like water, finds a way. Today's residents of Kaliningrad treat the history of their region with respect. They do not feel like occupiers, but they feel responsible for preserving what remains. Old German villas are being restored, cobblestone roads are being preserved, churches are being rebuilt. A surprising synthesis of cultures is taking place. A Russian city with German roots, where the Russian soul lives in Gothic decorations. This is proof that life always triumphs over death, and creation is stronger than destruction. The wounds of the earth heal. Craters from explosions turn into ponds, and parks and museums grow on the sites of former forts. However, returning to April 9th, 45th year, we cannot help but wonder, could such total destruction have been avoided? Historians still debate this. Could Lasch have surrendered earlier? Yes. But the fear of the system he served was stronger than common sense. Could the Soviet command have simply surrounded the city and waited for the garrison to surrender from hunger? Theoretically, yes. But the war demanded speed. Every day of delay gave Germany a chance to regroup on other fronts. Therefore, the tragedy of Königsberg was inevitable in the logic of that war. It was the culmination of hatred and fury accumulated over 4 years. The city became a sacrificial altar on which the last terrible sacrifice was made before the finale in Berlin. Reflecting on the psychology of the besieged, one can recall numerous diaries later found in the ruins. People wrote about how their values changed. Gold, jewels, money lost all meaning. A sip of clean water, a piece of bread, good news that relatives were alive became valuable. The social hierarchy collapsed. A university professor and a port loader sat side by side in the basement, trembling with the same fear. War equalizes everyone, tearing off masks and ranks, leaving a person alone with their essence. Someone showed miracles of nobility, sharing their last. Someone turned into an animal, ready to cut a throat for a place in a safe corner. Königsberg became a giant laboratory of the human spirit, where, in extreme conditions, all the best and all the worst in people were revealed. The technical detail is also interesting: the use of captured weapons. By the end of the assault, Soviet soldiers eagerly used German Panzerfausts. This weapon, created by the Germans to fight Soviet tanks, now turned against its creators. Assault groups used them to break through walls and destroy machine gun nests. This is another paradox of war. Weapons have no nationality. They serve whoever has power and determination in their hands. German industry, working for destruction, ultimately helped destroy the Third Reich itself at the hands of a Soviet soldier. The assault on Königsberg also became an example of the interaction of different branches of the armed forces. Artillery, aviation, tanks, infantry, sappers, signalmen, all worked as a single clockwork mechanism. Signalmen laid cables under fire, ensuring battle control. Medics carried the wounded from under fire, performing their quiet feats. Quartermasters delivered ammunition and hot food. Victory was forged not only at the spearhead of the attack, but also in the rear, where thousands of people ensured this final push. It was a triumph of organization and logistics, which often remains in the shadow of descriptions of heroic attacks, but without which victory would have been impossible. The symbolism of the fall of Königsberg was clear to the whole world. Moscow saluted the troops with the highest category of salute. This was a signal to allies and enemies. The Red Army was capable of crushing any defense. The myth of German military genius was finally dispelled. If Königsberg had fallen, then Berlin was doomed. This instilled confidence in Soviet soldiers and completely demoralized the remnants of the Wehrmacht. Many German generals admitted after the war that the fall of East Prussia became for them the psychological end of the war, even if formally it continued for another month. In conclusion, I would like to say that the history of Königsberg, Kaliningrad is not just a chapter in a textbook. It is a living wound and a living lesson. It is a reminder that any peace is fragile, that the ambitions of politicians are paid for with the blood of ordinary people, that culture and civilization are a thin layer of ice over an ocean of chaos, and it is very easy to break that ice. We who live today must cherish this ice. We must remember those who remained under the ruins of April 45th, without dividing them into ours and theirs. For death has made everyone equal. Let the silence of the old forts be for us not emptiness, but a space for reflection. Reflection on the value of life, on the senselessness of aggression, and on hope, which, like a green sprout pushing through asphalt, always finds its way to the light even after the darkest and most terrible night. And as long as we remember this, we have a chance not to repeat the mistakes of the past. This is the main meaning of preserving historical memory, not to be proud of victories or to mourn defeats, but to understand who we are and where we are going, so as not to lose our way in the fog of the future.